All right, we're back. Um, cool. Thank you for joining us, everyone. For those close and afar, this is going to be our third episode, long awaited podcast. Um, I know we kind of had two back to back, and we took a little bit of a delay, but Toe and I are back for a very special episode of the Two Brothers podcast, loosely monikered here. So today we have a special guest here, Blake Chalfant, who we know your brother very well, but I know he's going to be a little jealous that you're going to be our first guest here. But you have a very interesting background and a lot of cool recent experiences and a lot of great wisdom for someone younger than us, Toe and myself. So yeah, welcome, Blake. Thanks for hopping on here onto the show.
Great to be here with you guys. Super stoked to get into it.
Totally. Um, yeah, I kind of want to start off, Blake. We'll get kind of right into it. So, um, for those that don't know, can you give a brief introduction, kind of on your background, like some of the work that you do, and maybe how you got started into it to begin with as well? But just kind of floor is yours, and just kind of broadly painting, I guess the brushstrokes from how you got to this point would be great.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it a little bit brief because I feel like I could spend a lot of time on some of those earlier years. But for those of you listening, and I'm sure there's probably some listeners who we went to high school with. So for those of you, long time no see, good to see you again. And yeah, so I grew up in North Carolina for the first about 8 years of my life. And then we moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where I spent the next about 10 years of my life, which is where I met you both going to school in middle school and high school. But just for like a little bit of like a brief just overview of my life, I grew up with one older brother, white, kind of normal suburban family. I had all of my needs met. Um, yeah, I think you would just look at us like a normal family. I grew up playing soccer. We did kind of all of the normal suburban American family lifestyle. And then, yeah, and I think growing up, I was always kind of, I don't, yeah, I mean, I was kind of gravitated towards what you might call the cool kids in my grade or the popular crowd. And I was doing that whole thing. I was always playing soccer, going to all the cool parties, and um, always had a pretty solid friend group growing up. And then kind of the next clear step for me was, going to Tennessee Knoxville because that's where my brother went and that's where everyone went to school. And so at that point, I was kind of just, going through all of the normal motions of a kid growing up today. And, I got to Knoxville. I joined the fraternity that my brother was in, which, was the obvious decision. And, yeah, I got really deep into the party scene that freshman year for sure. I could go into that more, but yeah, I just really kind of lost in that scene for a little bit there, and kind of had my own unique rock bottom experience during that first semester where it was just really clear to me that the way that I was living my life was now no longer going to work, and it was deeply unfulfilling, and yeah, deeply unfulfilling, and just I kind of a little bit of like just this kind of scare where you see yourself in the mirror like, holy shit, I can't keep doing this. And so then that kind of started this slow journey of, asking those bigger questions of, well, who am I? What's my purpose in this life? What's the meaning of, all those kind of just deeper questions about the nature of this reality and the meaning of life. And so that next semester, that was actually the semester when COVID hit. So halfway through that, went home. But that next semester, I started doing meditation. I started just working out a lot, getting more into like rock climbing, spending time outside, and kind of taking on a different scene of friends. And definitely stopped partying nearly as much. And so then COVID happened, which was honestly deeply challenging for me. And I was at home and kind of just in living in my parents' basement, and didn't feel like there was much to do besides just yeah, I kind of felt like a real lack of meaning in my life at that point because we were just kind of sitting around all day, what to do. I started basically postmating all day long and skateboarding and smoking a lot of weed. That was that was pretty much my COVID experience. Um, but then I was and then the next year I transferred to Tennessee, Chattanooga, which was this huge kind of reset in my life of, okay, I have this chance where I don't really know anyone because on my own journey of kind of change, one of the hardest parts for me was actually like the people who kind of associated associated me with the person that I was trying not to be anymore. And so it was really hard for me to kind of like stay strong in this new person that I was trying to become in the midst of all these other people who saw me as, the kid who always went out, who was always down to go party, who was kind of, yeah. And so that was really challenging. So I transferred schools and I kind of had this fresh start. And it was like, okay, who do I want to be? What kind of outfit do I want to put on? And I was like trying on all these different clothes basically. And so I got much more into meditation and kind of, yeah, meditation definitely has been like a really big part of my own journey coming back to myself. But um, yeah, just kind of got into all these different ways that felt like they were healthy for me. And I was studying psychology at the time. And then the second semester of that school year, I was still just like feeling like I was like in this box that I needed to just like expand out of. And I felt like I was being kept down and I wasn't really enjoying my classes. And yeah, I knew it was time for a change. And so there's a story that I could share, but I'm not going to because of the length of time. But basically, I had this crazy interaction with this woman who lived on the West Coast and was kind of doing like counseling, life coaching, kind of just life guidance in general. And it just became very clear from our work together that it was like living on the West Coast would be much better for me. And basically the place that I was in Chattanooga at that school it was too contracted for me. I needed expansion. And one thing led to another. And she had this mutual friend out there who was into really similar things that I was wanting to get into. And after one Zoom call, I packed up in North Carolina and drove across the country to Washington to basically camp in their backyard for that summer. And this is the summer of 2020. And I was just like, I just want to be out there. I don't know what I'm doing. I was like, maybe I'm going to spend a year out here and try and get in-state tuition at this school in Washington. I really didn't know what my next step was, but I just knew that it felt right. And so from that point on, it like just led to me meeting so many people and just really diving headfirst into kind of the whole world of self-help, self-development, and led me on this journey of going through so many different modalities, and really just doing a lot of personal work. And I ended up finding the school that I ended up graduating from, which was perfect. It was a sped up program, studying exactly what I wanted. That was a school in San Francisco called CIS. And so then the next year of my life, I spent a few months in Portland, Oregon, and then I got tired of the clouds and I moved to Santa Cruz, California. Um, and then I graduated school. And so, um, yeah, and that pretty much brings us close to up to date. And then I just returned from 6 months of traveling Central South America, which maybe we can get into a little bit more. But um, that's a little bit about my history. And, all of that has really brought me to doing the work in the world, which I am currently doing counseling work with young men around 16 years old. And that's really just come from being a young man in the world of today and just realizing, like, gosh, how lost I was, how confused I was, and just how in need I was with guidance. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now, doing group work, individual sessions, and about to finish my first book, which will be out in about a month. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's it is quite the journey for, someone who is probably what, like 22, 23. But I think you have a lot of good nuggets in there. Specifically, like I think a lot of people resonate myself included, of just the fact of, you end up wearing like a lot of different shirts, right? Meaning like you kind of have this idea of, especially as you're kind of understanding the world around you and like your own place in it, and then also just the people who you do kind of surround yourself and spend as much kind of quality time with. And I think it's interesting hearing your perspective too, of like when you were at Chat and then kind of decided to just go to the West Coast. Like it was something that just like really gravitated towards you. I'm curious, like what was kind of like the genesis behind that, and then also like what made you comfortable in that decision, and then also like what were some things like in your time out there that really kind of like kept leading you down this rabbit hole of um just kind of getting to know yourself, and then also kind of what you provide and the things that really make you tick as a person.
It's a great question. And I think the best way that I can answer that, first of all, is that I tend to experience things in a really intense way. So for people who are maybe curious about following those threads of, those deep desires inside of them and whatnot, it doesn't have to look like you moving from North Carolina to Washington and camping in someone's backyard for 6 months. And I don't know where I necessarily got it from, but I tend to have a really easy time just trusting in life, trusting in when I'm feeling something and it's not necessarily logical, but it just feels right. Like moving across the country, I was leaving behind in Chattanooga a girlfriend that we were in love with each other, and we had a great relationship. And I was leaving behind a job that I was managing a restaurant in, my sophomore year of college. And I I didn't have any plans for school when I got out there, and I really didn't have that much money saved up. So logically, that move made no sense, but it felt so incredibly right. And so, yeah, I mean, as honestly as I can answer the question of why I did the move, it was just such a full body yes, and every single part of it felt, if I could just disconnect a little bit from all of the pros and cons and the long list that our analytical minds make for decisions in life, every cell of my body said yes, and it felt right. And so, that is really my honest answer. And I think also it was just like, it was at a time in my life, sophomore year in college, where I felt like I was able to make those, like making that leap in life. I was in such a deep contemplation during that time in my life of like, what's my purpose? Where's my meaning? And, really asking a lot of those questions a lot of the time. And so, I think when it came down to like making the decision to make such a drastic change in my life, I was ready to do it. And then being out there, the experiences that I was having, that really, didn't make me drive home a month later and just like kept going down the rabbit hole and kept going. Yeah, I mean, that was a time of my life where I really first started to have really profound experiences with psychedelics. And without going too deep down that rabbit hole, I had been taking psychedelics a little bit before then, but that was more of recreationally. And then my trip to the West Coast was basically my introduction to the entire landscape of the therapeutic side of working with psychedelics. And just a little bit of a backstory for those of you who are maybe unfamiliar with psychedelics, or at least the current state of psychedelics. Obviously, there's a lot of recreational use with them and a lot of just using them as party drugs. But, there's a ton of scientific literature that's coming out now that is really supporting how beneficial the psychedelics can be when worked with in a therapeutic setting. And if you're interested in that, definitely encouraging you to take a look. But anyways, so that was kind of my introduction to the therapeutic side of psychedelics, going out to the West Coast. And I was having really profound experiences, like peeling back really big layers of myself. And I was just discovering more and more and more of myself. And just, in a way, I got addicted to it. And at some points, maybe a little bit too addicted to just doing my inner work, to continually peeling back the layers that are no longer serving me, peeling back the layers of who I believed I thought I was my entire life, all of these, different identities that we form growing up in our, adolescent years that really are just, protective mechanisms to our environments. Um, I really got addicted to it because I was, you know, the more that I dug, the happier I was, the more fulfilled I was, the more like connected with purpose and meaning in my life I was. And so, I think that really was the driving force that just continued to bring me deeper into that rabbit hole.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that you shared. For me particularly, I know you mentioned like some of like the obstacles or the metaphorical like rock bottom that you may have experienced, and some of the hardships are within society, within yourself, within I guess your friend group, and then you causing or then having you I guess relocate to first Chad and then out west. So I guess to kind of move or pivot into like a wider perspective, I know you mentioned that you work with 16-year-olds and maybe young adults or young men. Are those kind of similar issues that some of your clients are experiencing, or that some, I guess, young adults, like what are some of those things that they're experiencing? Or can you, I guess, give a little bit of a lens into some of the things or just areas that you guys might discuss, or what are some of those issues that young men are having in this generation or in this day and age?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and that's something that I was deeply contemplating in the beginning of my work, and along my own path of I guess self-help, like reaching out to high school friends and almost being like, wait, are you guys going through the same exact thing too? And just realizing how so much of what I carry it has is collective things, collective issues that in many ways it's just a cultural, it's a collective wound that so many of us carry, the growing up in our culture. I didn't grow up being sexually abused or in a super traumatic, family system. My wounding comes from, the culture that I was raised in, the environment. And so, yeah, there's so many things, and that was a big reason for writing the book. But just for perspective, so I'm working with a 12-year-old right now, and he's actually my youngest client that I've ever worked with, and I work with clients up to like 26 years old. But it's interesting because my younger client right now, what he's going through is deep fear and anxiety of 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 interacting with people who he's not very familiar with because he's so terrified of who he should be, right? Of like, I don't know who to be, and it's terrifying. And so that's like the 12-year-old thing. That's like the 12-year-old wounding that he's going through. And I think about when I reflect back on myself, that like middle school time period around age like 10 to 12, that seems to be such like a core area where so many of us start to kind of, I don't want to say go wrong, but lose ourselves. That's really when like the ego is really starting to come online. That's when friend groups are starting to come online. And that's when like the idea of having a tribe really starts to carry so much more meaning. For me, like walking into whether it was like sixth grade is like, okay, now I got to get my game face on. I got to find my group, and I got to survive in this environment. In a way, those are what certain parts of our brain are saying. It's like, we're in this new environment, we need to survive, and what that means is we need to find a tribe. And so for so many of us, what happens is that in order to find a tribe, we say, who do I need to be to fit into this tribe? And for many of us, that means I need to be someone else than myself, because these tribes are in an environment, and the environment is inside of a culture. And so basically I think about it like there's a rubric inside of the environment, and inside that rubric it says you need to do this, this, and this, and this if you're going to earn validation or acceptance, which is what we're all searching for. And so that kind of serves as our roadmap of who do we need to be. And like when we were in middle school, that was like where Sperry's and wear Sperry's and Nike high socks and a polo. But that's just like one example of like did any part of me really want to actually wear that outfit, or did any part of me think that actually looked cool? Fuck no. I did that because that's what I thought I had to wear. And so that concept is so applicable to everything. And so the number one thing that I see in all of my clients and just from talking to friends is horrible self-worth issues. And so not believing that who we are at our essence is enough. And so when that occurs, what we say to ourselves is, okay, I'm not already enough for who I am, so now I need to become someone different. I need to become the person that my environment wants, and I need to become the person that earns the approval and validation from my environment. So I would say that is that's the number one thing, is just we're all wearing masks. We're all trying to show that we have our shit together, and because of that, we're all wondering why we are the only ones who are broken on the inside.
Yeah.
It's like this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think like a very important thing that we kind of sleepwalk into, especially in like the middle school, high school days, is like this identity, right? And I like what you said about like the rubric, where you're so kind of fixated on joining, this tribe, or just kind of having like this friend group, that you kind of like, you're almost a chameleon in the whatever friend group that you end up kind of identifying with. And like the funniest thing is like, these are something that you experience in sixth grade, and it's something I see every day, at 25, right? Is that people, like when you spend 10 seminal years of your life, like it's kind of not necessarily tied to identity, but like tied to a tribe or things that you do to some regard probably do align with, but not who you are inherently, present as a person. And I think to your point that it's really important to, and I think this speaks to like a lot of your own personal journey too, is that kind of how critical that self-observation is. Because, if you end up, and I'm very guilty of it too, and I think most people are, is like when you are kind of stuck trying to identify with other people, or like kind of to maintain your status and your kinship within that tribe, it's very hard to look at yourself honestly, right? And I think as you get older and you try to understand like what is that purpose, or like what do I try to bring, what am I good at, what should I be doing, like when you start asking yourself these questions, like they are often, to your point, tied to that collective wound, right? But the fact is, like, while we all share that wound, we all kind of like get out of it in our own individual ways. And I think like that's the step that a lot of people kind of like struggle with, is like, all right, now I've realized this wound, but then how do I, the question still remains of like, what am I left with, right? Like, what kind of person, what do I like? And I think you never find the answer to those questions until you look like very closely within yourself.
Right. Yeah. I love that. And, it really speaks to me, like, for so many of us, I think we make this mistake as, I want to say as men, because I really don't know the experience of, women necessarily in this regard. I assume that it's pretty similar. But, I had a friend and I asked him, because I know from going through middle school and high school with him, he's got some serious stuff from that time period, because he kind of got dealt just the shitty hand. He was one of the kids who was, just the target of everyone being made fun of. And, he was the target, and he was the one that everyone would laugh at. And so, for him, it's like he's in an environment that to certain parts of him does not feel safe at all, like feels dangerous. And so how does he adapt to that environment so he can survive in that environment? For a lot of people like that, kind of who have that archetype of being the one who gets picked on, it's like they usually adapt to it by like going along with the jokes and like feeling like that's just okay, because that's what's going to allow them to survive, versus like fighting back. But to not go too deep into that, when I asked him like, hey, like this experience you had in middle school and high school, like probably really has impacted who you are today. And what he said was, I grew from that experience. I'm a tougher person because of that. And that seems to be like the core narrative that, especially as men, we kind of carry. It's like we look at our pain as, well, I'm tougher because of it. And we look at who we are today and we say, well, I am the result of all these past experiences and I'm a tougher person because I went through all that stuff. And I think a lot of us, we assume that who we are today is set in stone. It's like we have been shaped over the course of our life into who we are today, and now we have to be that person for the rest of our lives. And I think that is such a huge mistake that so many of us make because so many of us are operating in the world with out of date software. We are operating in the world with defense mechanisms from when we were in challenging situations when we were younger, right? And it's like, do I want to live my life with this feeling like I have to be a chameleon with everyone that I'm around? No, and I don't have to,
Yeah,
right?
I'm going to push back on that just a little bit, just because I actually think most people do who understand potentially that like they are working with out of software. Like I think, let me word this better. Like I think people who kind of are really struggling with like insecurity or like kind of their place in the world, it's not because they don't want to change, right? I think it's like they are
Hmm.
stuck with trying to figure out how to change into themselves. So I think it's like, and then maybe I just misinterpreted, but I think like most people who, like I personally, I know you guys probably agree too, like do not want to be the same person I currently am in 30. Like maybe I have like very structural things that I do align with, and my skeleton I think is in a good spot. But like I hope there's more growth, right? Like I'm optimistic that there's going to be more growth. So I don't think people necessarily like are okay with their current state and like want to continue on this path. Now it's a very uncomfortable one, but I think at the end of the day, I think the biggest step is trying to then figure out where to go after that, right? Of like, okay, I do,
Mm,
I want to be a better, I want to be more authentically myself. I want to be more present into who I am and be more confident and at peace with the person I am. But what does that look like? And I think that's the question that most people end up struggling. I mean, myself included too. I don't want to think that this is like an independent thing. Um, but I think especially men, because we end up aligning with our tribe, is that we kind of want to get like almost evolve out of that, but it's just a very tough kind of initiation step.
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of peeled back a lot of interesting layers, Toe, but I know, Blake, you mentioned like the word tribe, like especially in those formative middle school years for us folks like here in the US. But in a sense, it's like for like young adolescents or like become, or it's our first time in that middle school year where you're kind of beginning to envelop yourself in our quote unquote society or our culture. And in a lot of ways, it's like kind of a primal existence because when you are that person that's getting picked on, the one thing you're trying to seek is acceptance or validation. And that's true even for people like our age or and even older, like, and you see that like within corporate life and within people that work full-time jobs trying to achieve a certain benchmark or a certain like marker within society to deem themselves as worth it or validated. But I think what I kind of wanted to lead into from the point that you made, Toe, is like there becomes a time where when you're trying to form an identity or you know that you need to change, there's kind of a parallel also with your experience, Blake, of you felt there was a point where you were so uncomfortable with who you were at that time when you were in Knoxville and you weren't feeling your best and you were doing these things that you know didn't align your deep down you knew it didn't align with who you were meant to be and you knew that you needed to make a change. And so there was kind of an arbitrary point in where it was no longer okay to go on your current path. You had no idea where you were going to be, but you knew that a change had to be made. There was like something that broke the camel's back. I don't know what it was,
mm,
but in that essence, you can kind of see how it unfolded where you moved out west, you changed schools. The roadmap wasn't completely clear, but you knew that there was a change that had to be made. And it wasn't
mm,
necessarily the roadmap or the direction wasn't necessarily clear, but and I think that's what people in our generation or just young adults get caught up. It's like, oh, I need to have everything figured out. I need to know exactly where the destination is or where I need to go. But I think that the realization that you need to change or the awareness or understanding that you need to change is more or less all that needs to occur. Right.
Yeah, and real
totally.
quick here, and I know Blake, you kind of talked about this too, and I think, um, you know, when you kind of do have that awareness, um, like having the trust to, because, and like Benny, to your point, like you're never, like my dad kind of talks about, like, imagine like a three-legged stool, and like you can put, spirituality, financial, socially, whatever, but like there never, ever, ever in life is your stool kind of like fully on the ground, right? There's usually something off that just doesn't fit right. But I think having the trust and just the wherewithal to like be okay with being not necessarily uncomfortable, but like figuring things out on the fly, or figuring like, and kind of going through that peel back process, and having the trust and the vulnerability to be okay with what you end up finding, because a lot of it is sometimes uncomfortable to admit, and they're not always pleasant truths. They rarely are, actually. But I think like having that trust in yourself, I think is really imperative when you are trying to figure these things out, because if you're not really truly honest with yourself, and it's very easy to lie of like, oh, especially in the college, high school years, where you're like, I'm with my friends, I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. And you can kind of keep perpetually lying to yourself and thinking that your current state is your just current being, and you're stuck with that. But having the awareness and having the trust in yourself, I think it really helps you not only discover those vulnerabilities, but almost embrace them and say, this is my wound, but like, this is something that I'm working past, and I'm okay with it being there, because I'm not going to just scratch it off and try to move on and then just, pretend like it's not there.
Yeah, I love that so much. I want to speak to that, but before I forget, I just want to totally clarify that I don't mean at all that people just don't want to change. And yeah, if that wasn't clear,
no, I know.
No, thank you for clarifying that. So, oh my gosh, what you guys are speaking to, like this, self-trust, inner knowing, is so important, and it's something that I think a lot about as on this journey of, self-discovery, of peeling back the layers of life in general, finding purpose or passion in life, finding quote unquote your path, like all of that. Your navigation system for that has to be your own inner knowing and trust, because your inner knowing means nothing if you don't trust in that. Yep. And that's something that I feel so passionate about, and unfortunately is something that we have forgotten in our culture of really strengthening that muscle in our youth, in our developmental years. You see, we are stuck on the hamster wheel growing up. So it's okay, you're going to go to school. Parents know best, right? It's like parents have all the answer and knowledge, and children just need to listen blindly to everything that they're saying. And then we go through the school years and we memorize all the facts for the test, and we go through those motions, and teachers have it right. But there's such a lack of like critically thinking about it, of critically checking in and say, okay, is this actually what I want? Is this actually feel true for me? Is this a deep desire of me? And so, that muscle is like sitting in that muscle of inner knowing is like sitting in the attic with like dust on it, in an old sheet over it. And so I really like, it is, I think people kind of brush over that concept, but to me, it is like everything. It is everything.
I totally agree. Yeah. I totally agree. So
100%.
But like, yeah, it's so funny how so much of that trust is abstracted away with the group that you're in, right? Like, I think if you're like, when you have like a good friend group that like you do trust in, you almost like are okay with following the crowd of thought, of action, whatever they're doing or thinking about, like, because you trust that identity. But the last thing you're like, what you're not doing is looking within of like what you actually believe in. And so you abstract so much of the critical thought and almost partition it off with the people that you're around, because you do trust them as human beings. And while they might not be wrong, like that's not your own organic thought and your own organic emission towards, the earth, right?
Yeah. Totally. Honestly, to dig in a little bit deeper to that, Toe, I know, like, I really appreciate that you guys kind of mentioned like what I like self-trust and inner knowing, but my word I like to use is intuition, which is, I guess, my moniker for it. But that's kind of like when you made your transition, Blake, or when you knew you needed, there was like a level of desperation when you knew you needed to make a change, where you trust, like you had to trust your intuition, where you knew deep down that is like what exactly that you needed to do to make a change or make a different step forward. And so kind of what you were saying, to where when you have a friend group where you kind of like delegate some of that intuition or that mindset or opinion onto others, like in my opinion, like that's kind of like how our current society is constructed. And when people are just like scrolling through TikTok or on social media constantly, like you're subconsciously like trading your intuition and allowing society to kind of like take its venoms and like its toxins deep into your soul.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like that's not something that's avoidable, I would say, unless you like kind of live in like a cabin or just you just live in a forest or something like that. But I think it's worth knowing that like if you're a participant in society, society is always going to have its society and culture will always have its way with you. And it's just, I think it's worth the realization that your intuition and your trust in yourself and more or less your potential kind of will be compromised if you do trust society or you do kind of allow yourself to be that kind of person to seek that validation or that acceptance.
Yeah. And real quick, because I really liked how you said this, Blake, of it is a muscle, right? It is a muscle. And when the longer that you kind of, to your point, like you keep it in the attic and it doesn't get the work and you don't constantly like, it's harder and harder to kind of bring it back out of the attic. And then, you kind of start, again, I like to kind of, my point is just like you end up sleepwalking through a lot of things that happen in life because you're not used to exercising that muscle, right? And I totally, I really liked your wordage there because I totally agree.
Yeah, totally. It definitely does become harder to use because it's like trying to write with your non-dominant hand after a while. It just feels uncomfortable and we don't know how to do it. And one of my mentors, Michael Gay, said to me one time, finding your no is just as valuable as finding your yes. And that really sticks with me on this topic of, and it applies to so many things, but it really is like the layers of the onion, and it applies to finding like, who are you, right? If you ask me who am I, it's harder to answer that than answering who am I not, right? And so finding really coming back into your inner knowing, like my advice and his advice to me that really stuck with me is just like is experiment, like experience things in life, and you'll and check in with yourself when you do it, because I guarantee you that there will be even if it's just the littlest sliver of a no or a yes, you'll be able to just feel it. Oh, okay, that felt a little bit off, right? And you follow that, and then every time that you follow that and you come back to center, it's like you go a little bit to the right and you come back to center. You go a little left, then you come back to center. Every time that you do that, you're strengthening the muscle. And, I think there's a lot of people who hear this concept of the inner knowing and, they've been so disconnected from it that it almost sounds like a myth, like a fairy tale. And they question, does that even exist within me? Like, I don't think that applies to me. And I'm telling you, it does. Like we all have this innate inner compass within us. And then the other thing about this was just like, well, why don't we listen to it? And, I've spent a lot of time thinking on that, and really listening to yourself and trusting yourself is fucking scary. Like, it is vulnerable. It is scary. You're going out on your own. Like, it's a lot easier to give the reins of your life to culture, to your environment, than to trust yourself. Because when you follow and you go with the mainstream and you go with kind of what's expected with you, no one's going to look twice at you. No one's going to question you. No one's going to judge you. And let's just say that you trust your inner knowing and you're going to do the thing, and then it ends up failing. Everyone's staring at you, pointing the finger and saying, look at you, you failed. But if it's a lot easier to basically go on autopilot and let our culture drive your vehicle. Because then if something's going wrong, or maybe you don't like your life, or, you feel deeply unfulfilled, you can point the finger at the driver because you're not the one driving your ship. Yep. And so I want to end with like offering so much compassion and understanding to why we don't listen to our own inner knowing, and like how scary it really can be. I mean, I lived so much of my life that way, and it's still still a journey of, strengthening that muscle.
Yeah. I want to weave kind of those 2 points that you made, because I think they complement each other like really beautifully. Is that I think, we all are, or, the three of us in particular, big proponents of experimentation, right? And I think none of us are finished products, right? Like, and the only way that I think you kind of continue to chisel down into your own uniqueness and kind of have better understanding of who you are is this experimentation. And this could be something as dumb as trying different foods, or going to different cities, or listening to different types of music, or like going rock climbing, like trying out new just hobby, like, because at the end of the day, like your body, like to your point, like it might be a full 100% yes, and it might be a full 100% no, and it might be 50-50 where you like some things, but having kind of almost a report card and check-in of these things that you experiment allow you to kind of just chisel yourself, like more like kind of like rock chiseling, not like buff chisel, but like, but I think like that, you want to kind of keep chiseling down to who you truly are as a person. And I think the only way that you find that out is by trying out these different things, because like there are so many unknowns to who we still currently are. And that's why we were kind of talking about, like, I do want to kind of change, and I know we want to continue to grow. And the only way that you do that is by exploring more of the things that the world does have to offer, because there's so many unknowns to us, that are unknowns to the individual, I should say, that we don't know what's going to hit or what's going to fade, but we know that the culmination of all these things is going to be something really pure.
Totally. Yeah. And I think just to add on to that, because I know, like, as you mentioned, like there is so much out there for all of us. And off air, we were kind of talking about like The Alchemist and in that book, but it's kind of like what you were alluding to, Blake. Like we all have our own set path, and we have our own unique DNA and our own soul, and we're all meant to trailblaze our own path and not kind of go by the way of society, so to speak. And that's kind of like, that's the easy road, to be completely honest. But I think the one thing I wanted to add to is, oh, sorry, I just completely went blank here. I had a good point, actually. Sorry, I went blank.
No worries.
You want to come back? I've got something.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just like want to add, I love what you just said, Ben, and just want to add to that, like, we're all here to trailblaze our own path, and there is zero blueprint of what that's going to look like. So it's not going to look like mine. It's not going to look like yours. It's going to be completely unique, and that might mean that like you can still be integrated into society and blaze your own path. But the difference is that you're not doing these things because they are doing it, or because you've been conditioned to that way of being. You're doing it because you are so aligned with who you are, and that's what is wanting to express into the world. And so you might be working for Amazon and be blazing your own path, right? Like it doesn't, there's no right or wrong way. And then the other thing that was just really jumping out to me is this like concept of, so within, so without, right? And so life is constantly holding up mirrors for us, whether it's in relationship or whether it's just in other experiences. And so sitting with you both, right? You both reflect a certain quality of me. Like you both draw out certain quality of Blake. And that's different than how I show up around my mom and my brother. It's like we're all kind of like drawing out these different parts of who we are, right? And that's the same way with experience. And so when I hear you talking about like, just keep experiencing life, like just keep experiencing the diversity of life, and naturally, like, there's different qualities of us that wake up. Like, I know I've been around certain people before, and it's like after hanging out with them, I'm just like, wow, I didn't even know that this part of me existed. It's like they brought out a certain quality of my being that I didn't even know was there, and it feels so good, right? It's like life is constantly presenting us with certain experiences, people, situations that are like helping us, find more of who we are.
Yeah.
And sometimes what that means is life is actually showing us, like, the way that I think about this is alignment. And so life is constantly trying to bring us back into alignment with who we are. And so many times what that means is that it actually has to show us where we're out of alignment. And so I think that actually is kind of what happens when a lot of people are suffering, or why isn't life working for me? Why are my relationships so shallow? All of that to me is really just life is showing you where you're out of alignment.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just, you said a lot of great things, Blake, and you helped me recall what I wanted to say. So it's exactly like you were saying, like we have like, there are certain things where life tries to realign you into like where your path is truly supposed to be and genuinely supposed to be. But in a lot of ways, what you mentioned, Toe, and what I wanted to kind of discuss is like those items have changed where it's really uncomfortable to try this new, like rock climbing or try this cooking class or jujitsu, or it can be like maybe you go to like some, I don't know, like some there's like an interesting like panel group or some sort of focus group, or just meeting people is like where I wanted to allude to. Like those things are uncomfortable, or like maybe if it's a girl or you try to speak to someone new or whatever it is, but those those items and experiences in life are it's like trying to make that jump, or it's uncomfortable to do those things. And so those are
Mm,
kind of the things that I just wanted to highlight there, and I just wanted to
Yeah.
mention that before it slipped my mind again.
No, I
totally.
appreciate those thoughts, and I think one of the beautiful things about, Blake, you kind of said of going attacking things or trying new things with zero blueprint is there's zero expectation, right? And I think when you are so used to going through this homogenized society and you're kind of aligned with certain groups, there is an expectation, right? There's an expectation of validation, of making sure that you think you belong in certain aspects and that you like doing certain things. But when you try out these things and you go off the beaten path, or you try to meet new people or try new things, you realize like those are very authentic things, and when you take them in that alignment, like there's no gray area there. Like sometimes it's just very, very distinct on that alignment, and I think those allow you to have a better understanding, like of who you are as a person. Like I loved what you said about there's sometimes you'll meet people and you're like, well, like where did that come from? And it's just like it's fun because like it evokes such a new emotion, and sometimes you really gravitate towards that, and you want to kind of keep cultivating that and keep spending out with those that person or those type of people. But again, like if you are kind of stuck in this rut of society, like you can see how it's very easy to just almost like homogenize yourself because you have to live up to an expectation. You're kind of almost aligned with that you kind of forget these little things, that different personality quirks about yourself that you didn't even know existed. So I do want to just like highlight that because I thought that it was beautifully said. I totally agree.
Yeah. And also there's just
Mhm.
one other portion I kind of wanted to add in on. I think, Blake, you mentioned it like a little bit ago where you said it's easier to figure out what you're not as opposed to what you are. And so I think the way I like to visualize it is like you're peeling back your layers of who you truly are. And then at one point, there's going to be no more layers to peel back from. Like you're going to reach your bedrock foundation of who you truly are. And so I think kind of what you were saying, so is like these new experiences and these new people and these new places that we're all meant to go and these things we're meant to do, they're all peeling back layers of like who we actually truly are. And I think when you don't take the step, or you don't try, or when you don't place those things, or when you don't place yourself in those uncomfortable situations, you're just delaying the opportunity to peel back of who you truly are. And um, it might be more comfortable to sit back in the moment, but I mean, there's going to be at some point like down the line, there might be some regret on things that you didn't do or you had the opportunity to do in your youth.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I think after a long time of contemplating just, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of the existence of humanity on this planet? And, I think what you just spoke to really is the core of what I kind of have come to in these days of, I really believe that we're here to be on that journey of peeling back the layers. And, at this point, I'm not really sure that we do ever find a point of, reaching the finish line. I mean, actually, I don't believe that. But I really do believe like it is our purpose being here to just literally experience life and, to continue cultivating deeper and deeper connection with who we are at our essence and allowing that to express in the world. Like, I believe that is the core of kind of like the collective purpose. And so that's a whole other rabbit hole I could go down. But before moving on, maybe I do just want to touch on what you were talking about, Ben, with how some of that resistance to going out and rock climbing or trying new things. And I think it's so important to kind of really put a finger on, like, you are going to have resistance on that journey of self-discovery, finding yourself, finding your path, all of that. And the way that I think about it is, over our lives, through all of our different experiences, through all of our conditioning, all these different inputs that kind of lead us to believe who we are, it's developed this box that we are in. So I have the box of Blake, you have the box of Toe, you have the box of Ben. And inside of our boxes is like everything that we believe to be who we are. And so everything that does not conform with that story lives outside of this box, right? And, just going back into like our evolutionary biology, these more reptilian parts of our brain that kept us safe back in the Stone Age, it was like avoiding unknown kept us safe. Avoiding change kept us safe, because what is unknown back then might be a saber-toothed tiger sitting in a dark cave. Like, going through the same exact routine kept us safe. I know where the food is. I know where my shelter is. All of like having that kind of known environment was so beneficial back then. And I think something that is essential to being a human being today that most people have no idea is that, like, we're still operating with that software in a certain degree. And so there is still there's like very strong parts of our mind that avoid change, that avoid unknowns in our life. And so basically, like, anytime you're going down a path of change, you have to know that there's going to be resistance, because it feels safer to just stick inside of your box. Even if that means inside of your box you're sitting around all day, like getting high playing video games, that still feels safer than going out and like starting a business, because that is change. And guess what? The last thing I want to say on this is, when you start listening to your inner knowing, it is so incredibly vulnerable, because what happens if I listen to myself and I finally do the thing that I'm deeply desiring and I fail? That is so much scarier than what if I go and work for my dad's business when I don't really feel passionate about it and I fail then? It doesn't even compare. And so, yeah, I really just want to acknowledge, like, the resistance is normal. And if that concept is lighting you up, go read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. It is fabulous.
Yeah, that's a great book. Just to add another question to that, do you think that resistance is like acceptance or validation or not feeling good, or the feeling of not being good at something at the start? Do you think those are areas of resistance, or I guess what are those areas that, or the things that are holding you back? Not you, but like generally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely me too. I'm experiencing this big time, like writing a book, and it's like, and I guess to use, actually, it's a great example to use, like, writing this book. It is like, because the decision to write this book for me came from a very deep place of desire within myself. It came from me really following my inner knowing, and I guess like following my path. And at some point it was like, okay, I'm feeling the call to write a book. And so writing this book came from that place of deep desire. And it's also coming from like such a deep connection to my compassion. Like, this book is about like the pain, the struggles that I've gone through. It's coming from such a deep place within myself. And so, there's a lot of vulnerability to that. And so I'm putting myself out into the world with this book. And so there is parts of me that are so terrified of, what if you get judged? What if people leave you that you were previously friends with? But the core of it is, what if you listen to something so deep within you and it turns out to be a failure? Like, that really is I think that really is the deepest layer of resistance in following passion, purpose, who you are. All of that is like, what if I take the step outside of my box into following myself, into finding myself, into fill the blank, and it doesn't work out, and I end up failing. Like that is the scariest thing in this life. Period. End of story.
Yeah. I think the reason failure is so scary is because I think it's just the outward expectation or the societal pressure of what happens between, because obviously you have a winner and then you have a loser, like colloquially speaking. But that feeling of being a loser or being a failure, I think that's the negative connotations that come about as of being like a failure or failing at something or whatever the case may be. That inherently is not bad. It's not wrong. It's just
Hmm.
the external pressure and those societal conditioning that comes with those those sort of actions or those end results. I think are what holds people back. But I guess those that don't really care about like winning or losing or like those failures. I think when you can get past that, I think that's when you can kind of like really go beyond just the end result and just playing freely as a child or like writing or rock climbing. I know we've used that example quite a bit, but I think that's kind of just like the way I see it. And um,
Totally.
yeah, but I know you kind of mentioned your book, and I think that's kind of a great segue into like some of the. I know you did like share some of the motivations and some of like the finer topics about it, but do you want to dig into it a little bit more? I don't know if you have a title just yet or
Mm.
maybe the release date, because I know you mentioned it's coming out pretty soon, but I think now's kind of a good time to kind of plug that in some of the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, I can definitely lay. It's called The Unseen Way, and I can definitely lay out some of the topics. But honestly, everything that we're talking about is such core pieces of the book. Um, Definitely. So it's built into two parts, and the first part really is kind of just going through all of the conditioning and kind of these collective wounds that I've been talking about that young men and men in the world were kind of born into. Um, but I guess the concept that I want to start on is like, you know, we are always just trying to figure out the right way of doing this whole life thing. Humans have been doing that since the day that we evolved into humans, right? I mean, speaking just from like evolution and science, like life is coming through us and we are trying to do life in better, more efficient ways, and we're trying to continue life. Like that is scientifically like our purpose. And I think that we are at a very critical time on our planet where we have been living in a way that is not working. And at some point in our past, we made a right turn and we said, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're living this way now. And I'm not saying that it was such a conscious decision, but to me, it's as simple as that. Like the way that we are living as human beings on this planet is not working. It's not working. And when I say it's not working, what I mean is it's not breeding health and well-being in our species and in the planet as a whole. And I think in like measuring what really matters, like that's it. That's really it for me. I don't care what we're doing. If we are healthy and if we are healthy and the planet is healthy, that's it. And so I think that we are at a time where we're really in need of admitting to ourselves, like, okay, we didn't get it all right. So can we start to find a way of being on the planet that works? And my book is really like, can we find a way of being men in the world that breeds health and well-being? I mean, I don't necessarily have all the statistics with me, but like if you look at chronic disease, for example, like it is through the roof. um, and I could go down a long list, and we're literally poisoning our soil, the water that we're drinking, the food we're drinking is full of like it's um yeah, so it's not working, and we're at a time where we're needing to start asking the bigger questions. And we can't sit here and start blaming each other and ask, well, who did it wrong and what went, like who fucked it up for us? It's just like we need to be forward thinking and asking these bigger questions. And so my book is like one small puzzle piece to that, and it's the way that I have really um kind of been finding my way forward. And I think the biggest like start to this journey, collectively and individually, change, healing, all of it, is just sitting down with yourself and looking in the mirror and acknowledging the things that you have wanted to run away from for such a long time. And so, the book is really like wanting to shine a flashlight on these things that no one wants to talk about, right? Like looking at yourself in the mirror and really acknowledging, like, I don't feel like who I'm looking at is enough as a human being. Like, that's fucking deep. That really cuts deep. And unfortunately it's the truth for a lot of us at some level. And so, another huge topic that we don't have to get in, but I wrote about in the book, that is something that is definitely an area that is, just full of wounding for so many of us, is sexuality. And, sexuality and pornography in young men, and just like the extreme lack of guidance and wounds that so many of us carry within that area. But in terms of men, like, that is probably the most taboo topic to like open up with your brothers about. But yeah, I mean, if you guys have questions, I'd be happy to go into it more. We could dive into passion and purpose, which might be pretty juicy.
Yeah. Wait. So
Yeah.
when is it coming out? By the way.
I'd say within the next month or two, closer to 1 month though.
Awesome. Yeah. Because I think it's interesting, like from the highest of macro levels to the most microscopic of individual traits, how so many of our solutions to problems and issues is like, let's just kick the can down the road. It's like, well, that's a big issue. Let's worry about it later. Let's put a Band-Aid on these solutions until we have to present it again. Because I think it's very uncomfortable, and in some cases, and in most cases, very challenging to actually address the problem for what it is. But it's far easier to, accept that, oh, maybe we're not going to figure this out, or maybe we just don't want to run into that at the current state, that you don't spend enough resources and mind power figuring them out, which only exacerbates that actual problem. And so I'm glad that you're spending, spending the time and also just like the brain power to shine a flashlight on these things, because like at the end of the day, to your point, I think that is the solution, right? There's no cookie cutter,
Mm-hmm.
there's no fabric, there's no prescription that's just going to solve these things, but internal reflection on the problem themselves and the things that they're creating is, I think, the conversation that needs to be better and needs to be, I think, more consistent across the board, across people. And I think that's something that we can try to do. And I think that's honestly just a goal of this podcast too. It's just like, let's talk about these things. Let's bring people out of their comfort zone, so we can make, to your point, a better world.
Totally. I appreciate those words. And it's such an important point of like, let's just talk about it. Like, let's just acknowledge it. And so much of what we talked about today, we could go down a laundry list of like little detailed how-tos, like how to find your inner knowing 101 and like all of these things. But to me, like the core of it really is like, once we really acknowledge it, it begins this like snowball effect. And it kind of like the process, it's like, the image I get is almost like you push the ball down the hill and now it's starting to roll. But you have to look at yourself clearly, and you have to just acknowledge, you have to acknowledge what's there. And it's the same, it's going back to the quote of finding your no is just as valuable as finding your nest. Yes, when we find our no, when we acknowledge all of the stuff, it pushes us closer back to who we are, like back to that alignment. And also just, the book that I wrote really is, I come back to this concept of the wounded healer all the time, which for those of you who aren't familiar with the wounded healer archetype, it's like, the wounds and painful experiences that we experience throughout our life, like once we, really do the work of healing and moving through and transforming and change, like on the other side of that, all of those experiences really is like this basket of gems that we carry now. And it's almost like the medicine that we serve. And so, I believe that we all have that inside of us. We all have this like we all have this unique gift, and that gift is like our life. It is our unique experiences. And I guarantee you, there is someone that is waiting for you to share your story and to kind of hear that, like, me too, brother. Like, yeah, I went through that too. Like, and so it's so huge, just doing this work for yourself. Maybe you're like, I just want to be happier, or I just want to get a better sleep score on my Aura ring, whatever it is. But it really is so huge. You open up the doorway for so many other people, and yeah.
Yeah, that's. Oh, go ahead, Tao.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I appreciate you kind of sharing your vulnerability, especially, kind of in the written format, because I think like the alchemy of writing is, I've kind of just started a job actually where it's like all I do now is just write about far different things. But it's funny. It's like, it's very nerve wracking. Once you kind of put thoughts on paper, but then also pressing publish, right? And like kind of letting people explore your inner workings of a person. And like, that is terrifying. So I appreciate, the work that you are doing. And I know I feel like we could go down these rabbit holes like 10 times over. But I think, Benny, do you want to kind of wrap it up here?
Yeah, I was actually gonna kind of say, like, first of all, like, that was a kind of a beautiful conclusion there. I think that's kind of a great place to wrap up here. Yeah, we talked about a lot of really great topics today. A lot of interesting ones, a lot of things that like are going wrong, like within this generation, or some of the pitfalls or obstacles that like everyday folks like us are kind of experiencing pretty much day in and day out in this society. And obviously nothing's going to be solved, but I think kind of like how you mentioned, just beginning this dialogue and the conversation, I think is a great place to start, where we can have these genuine thoughts and these real, authentic conversations where I'm sure, like Blake, because I know prior to this podcast and this episode, like, we'd spoken at length, I think once or twice prior. And I know, I'm sure you were probably surprised that we were able to have like such an in-depth conversation, and kind of how you mentioned that, like, when you have these genuine conversations, it kind of peels back a layer that within yourself that you didn't know was there. And I think that's kind of what we did today. So yeah, Blake, I really appreciate that you kind of were the first guest on the podcast and we're our guinea pig here today, but kind of just wanted to open the floor to you to kind of finish out like your thoughts on the podcast, and to kind of also direct people to
Tell
where
more to
I guess
find
you
you.
are in social media. And yeah, put in your plug.
Yeah, just want to say thank you guys so much. It really is an honor and just so great to reconnect in this way and to be kind of, on this path together, doing this work, talking about these uncomfortable things. It's great. There's something about seeing people from my past that I knew in a completely different way, reconnecting in this way, that's really gives me a lot of hope. So, the last thing that I really just want to say is, I don't want to like project this kind of doomsday vibe of, the time that we're in, but we are really in a really interesting time on the planet, where there's a lot of potent things happening. And, as Zach Bush says, like, stress is the number one driver of evolution, right? Like, stress is what pushes something to do something in a different, more efficient way. It has to find a different way. And if you look at planet Earth right now, we are under the most stress that we have ever been under. And on the other side of all of that stress is so much opportunity of what we can become. And so it's so easy to get caught up in the analytical mind, in the logical mind, watching the news, and just kind of being in this place of, wow, look at how fucked up our world is. You can look at all the statistics, you can look at all of that, and it can be really overwhelming. But for some reason, I feel hope inside of my heart. For some reason, like, when I have these conversations with you guys, like, it lights me up. And I really do, like, just feel good about, where we are going. And so I say all of that to say, like, this isn't just some other time on the planet. Like, everyone who is here right now, I believe that there's some meaning that you are on this planet right now. And we all have something to give. We really do. And that might sound like fluff to some of you, but it really is coming from a really genuine place inside of my heart. And just really encouraging you to do this for yourself. I think there's been like in the past, there's been such a big divide from like big corporate people who are seeking like just to make a lot of money, and then these weird spiritual hippies who are like doing this personal work. And I love to see these bridges that are happening where people are finding these disciplines, and to me it's really coming down to what makes you feel good, what makes you feel healthy. And so just really encouraging everyone to go rock climb. Try something new. It's all in there. The potential for you to live a life connected to yourself, connected to passion, purpose. All of that is in there. No matter what the voice in your head is saying right now, no matter how much it tries to convince you it's not true, I promise it's in there. So you can find me at my Instagram, blake.chalfant, and my website is just blakechalfant.com. It's actually under construction right now, but and then the book is going to be coming out on Amazon, and it's The Unseen Way by Blake Chalfant, and would love to connect with all of you.
Awesome. Well, Blake, dude, thank you so much. I hope also, we can kind of have you back on too. I know we kind of scratched the surface on some things, and I think this will probably be an ongoing conversation. But I want to thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and just your vulnerability as well, just kind of sharing your experiences and, something I think we could all, walk away from and learn from. So thanks again, dude. It was a great time. And yeah, Benny, as always, it was good chatting it up with you. Hopefully, like and subscribe. I got to say it every time, like, subscribe. And but always hit us up too.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.